You're never saving any amount of money, right? That $40 doesn't exist just because you got a sweater marked down. You can't pay your rent with the money you saved shopping. You're still spending $60. But retailers know that we're going to feel good getting that savings. But there's no savings. You're just spending. You might spend a little less, but you're still spending. And the question you should be asking is, do I need this? And do I want to spend this amount for it? But we often don't.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Artists of Data Science podcast, the only self-development podcast for data scientists. You're going to learn from and be inspired by the people, ideas, and conversations that'll encourage creativity and innovation in yourself so that you can do the same for others. I also host open office hours. You can register to attend by going to bit.ly/ADSOH. I look forward to seeing you all there. Let's ride this beat out into another awesome episode. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star review. Our guest today uses behavioral science, real life, and humor to understand, explain, and change the world. He's the editor-in-chief of PeopleScience.com, a new thought leadership platform for applying behavioral science to the modern marketplace. He's co-authored Dollars and Cents with Dan Ariely, a book that was lauded as a brilliant and accessible look at behavioral economics, and it was dubbed Best Business Book of the Year by the Business Insider, Huffington Post, Audible, and the Washington Post. He's also a comedian who has toured most of this planet and even won the Bill Hicks Spirit Award for thought-provoking comedy. He's pretty much your friendly, typical Princeton educated lawyer turned award-winning comedian, best-selling author, and champion for behavioral economics. So please help me in welcoming our guest today, the man New York Times describes as delectable, Jeff Kreisler. Jeff, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be here today, man. I really appreciate you coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me and for putting together that very flattering introduction.
It is my absolute pleasure, Jeff. So talk to us a bit about where you grew up and what was it like there?
Sure. So I grew up in New England, Massachusetts, in a town called Amherst, Mass., where there are 5 colleges right around there: Amherst College, University of Massachusetts, and a few others: Hampshire, Smith, and Mount Holyoke. My dad was a physics professor at the University of Massachusetts, so I grew up sort of the kid of a egghead in a family that really valued education. I'm the youngest of 3. My brother and sister, both very smart, both very highly accomplished in their own fields. And, it was a rural town. It wasn't like living in the city. We studied and we played and it was fun. And, in my family, high academic achievement, like I said, was always expected, which I guess I kind of did. But then after that, I decided to get a little bit off the treadmill. It was my, what do you call it? My, spacing on the word, my privilege. Thank you for, it was my privilege to have the chance to, I went to a great prep school called Exeter Academy, and then I went to Princeton, and I went to law school, and it was my privilege that I could still go through all that and sort of try something different with all that as a safety net behind me.
So what kind of kid were you in high school, and what did you imagine that your future would look like?
High school was interesting. It was sort of a bit of a pivot point for me because I was at this prep school, Exeter, where everyone was really smart and everyone worked really hard. And for a while, I was just really grinding really hard. And I realized I was getting really stressed out about my grades and performance in high school, while also playing sports and having fun. But at some point, I stopped stressing about it. And I sort of, I wouldn't say I consciously became Zen, but I said, I'll work as much as I can, but I'm not going to worry, because I pictured a future of myself, alcoholic and divorced and full of ulcers in my 30s. And I didn't really want that. And I believe and still believe in hard work and learning from others, but that excessive stress and worry about little things can only get in the way. And I think that's helped guide me since then. I didn't really have a clear picture of what the future was, except for one potential future, that sort of rough one that I described.
So how did you go from prep school through this battery of education, becoming a lawyer, and then going into stand-up comedy? Like how did that happen?
Some of it was being the youngest child. I mean, there are anecdotal studies and maybe some others that youngest children often need attention, and so they develop sort of that entertainment tick. Some of it was having the privilege to know that I could take risks because I had these sort of fallback. I had tools. I had a law degree, a Princeton degree. I was never going to live on the street. And some of it was, I think I developed sort of a very active mind. I think probably most of your listeners as data scientists are similar, that sort of never rested. And at some point I sort of pointed that at what I thought was something more challenging. Like to me, it sounds a little conceited, but like I always could get good grades if I worked hard, if I studied. And it almost seemed like it was an easy path for me to go to these schools. Like I had a road laid out for me. I don't deny that it was privilege, right? If I went to Exeter and I could study, get grades, Princeton, get grades, law school, get grades, and I had these job opportunities to be a big corporate lawyer, make a bunch of money and be on the corporate partner track, and like this future laid out for me. And I just felt like I never really earned it. And I kind of wanted to challenge myself. It seemed, I don't want to say easy, but it seemed like that all I had to do was just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And at some point I'm like, I want to do something different, something special, something that's hard. And I was just drawn by the power of words, whether that's like in a constitution, there's a limited number of words in a constitution that creates a whole society. A contract is a number of words between parties that creates a relationship, or poetry and music or comedy, and how that creates feelings and emotions and other connections. And comedy drew me because it was this unique challenge that when you see comedians perform, even the most famous, they get on stage. Like I've seen Robin Williams perform many times. He gets on stage and for the first few minutes, he can do no wrong. But then he still has to be funny. Like it doesn't matter who you are and where you come from. You have to perform. And that was a huge challenge for me to like just be completely reliant upon my skills. And the fun thing about comedy is you can talk about anything. The only rule is you have to make people laugh. But you can talk about your life, you can talk about politics, you can talk about economics and data science. You just have to be able to connect on that emotion. And that to me seemed really freeing, that there was just one rule to follow. And you could dress however you want, you could show up whenever you want. And I love that idea of the potential to talk about big ideas.
Man, that's really profound. You're just like, all right, let me pick something hard to do that
was stupid.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely love that. So talking about words, talking about comedy. So let's start here. So how has comedy taught you more about behavioral science or economics? And from there, from doing the comedy, how did you end up linking up with Dan Ariely to write this amazing book?
Those are great questions. A comedian typically is sort of an observer of human behavior and then a reporter on that human behavior. And a scientist, a behavioral scientist, is someone that studies human behavior and tries to understand why things happen. I often describe it as sort of a yin-yang relationship, right? The comedian says, hey, you ever notice that people do this stupid thing? And the behavioral scientist says, yeah, and this is why. So to me, there's a great fit. Now, I didn't come to that from I didn't approach that in a linear way. Like I didn't know and say, oh, there's behavioral science. It's a perfect fit. This is my perspective looking back on my journey. I see the connection. More specifically, sort of the actual path that I walked looking forward was I did a lot of comedy, a lot of political comedy starting out. And someone approached me with the opportunity to write a business column for Jim Cramer's website. Jim Cramer does the Mad Money. That crazy guy, like, oh, you gotta get me, honk, honk. It's like a morning radio guy. Anyway, he has a website called thestreet.com, and a friend of mine was like, hey, do you want to write about the news in the week and make jokes about the business news? I said, no. He said, it pays. I said, yes. So I did that, and I had an economics degree, and so I could understand what was happening. Through that column, I got an opportunity to write my first book, which was a satire, called Get Rich Cheating, which was all about Enron and Lance Armstrong taking steroids in baseball, and Donald Trump was in there 10 plus years ago, and it was about a culture of cheating, and it was the satirical voice was, you should do this, everyone's doing it, you can too, right? But it was really had a different perspective on morals and ethics. Anyway, so that opened some doors for me, and one of the doors, the one that's proved the most fruitful, is meeting Dan Ariely, who, as your listeners may know, he's the author of Predictably Irrational, his big book. He's one of the leaders in the field of behavioral science, behavioral economics. He invited me to lecture at his class at Duke University in character. Like, my character was sort of a Stephen Colbert, tongue-in-cheek. And I would go and I would tell his Duke students, I did this several times, hey, you guys should cheat, right? Cost-benefit analysis. No one gets caught. There's no cost. And the benefits are you make millions. All you have to do is throw out your ethics. I would do my whole routine, and he didn't introduce me as a comedian. He didn't say it was a joke. And it was fascinating to me to watch these students interact with me and have different reactions. And the first time I did it, and then, talked with Dan, who I didn't really know much about, was my light bulb moment, right? Where I was like, aha, because that I learned about behavioral science. I learned that behavioral economics, behavioral science, a lot of different terms for it. And there are differences, but let's not get in the weeds. It basically looks at why we make the decisions that we do, right? It doesn't abandon traditional economics, but traditional economics says everything's cost benefit analysis. Reality is that that's not how it works, right? We are busy people. We have a lot of stress, and we don't always make the rational choice. And that's one reason why I sort of rejected doing work in traditional business and economics or in the law, because all the rules and the ways that that science, not the economic science, which isn't really science, but I know, said people would act, that didn't prove true because people are human. So anyway, I'm sort of rambling here and getting farther ahead of us, but I connected with Dan and saw his work and the work of his peers, and it was like, it was a crystallizing moment. I was like, oh, now I know why I rejected all this other stuff. Now I know why I'm drawn to obsessing how people do stupid things. And I just sort of dug in. We did some projects, and we came out with a book together on financial decision making in 2017. Since then, I've been trying to find ways to advocate for behavioral science as it's not a silver bullet, but it's an additional tool for people to have in their tool belt for their personal lives, for their relationships, for organizations, businesses, for societies and governments. And it's just another way to approach things. I don't think any one approach is accurate for everything, but it's a fresh perspective that I think is useful.
What's up, artists? I would love to hear from you. Feel free to send me an email to theartistsofdatascience@gmail.com. Let me know what you love about the show. Let me know what you don't love about the show. And let me know what you would like to see in the future. I absolutely would love to hear from you. I've also got open office hours that I will be hosting, and you can register by going to bit.ly/ADSOH. I look forward to hearing from you all, and I look forward to seeing you in the office hours. Let's get back to the episode. Right on, man. I'm ready to get into the book. So by the time this airs, it'll probably be right around Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Cyber Monday time, and probably a good time for people to start thinking about their financial decisions and what they do with their money. When it comes to money, we really don't have as great of an understanding of it as we might think that we do. So let's kind of get some Econ 101 type of stuff out of the way, starting with a seemingly easy question. What is money?
Money is something that I would like more of. Money is a way that we measure value. It's a way that we decide, when we're weighing our choices, what is the value of our choices? And money is one measure for that. It's become sort of a predominant measure, which is its own issues. And money it's really like, I'm not an anti-money or anti-capitalism guy by any stretch. I think money has done some incredible things, and money allowed society to blossom. Money is just really complex, right? Like, money is what we call fungible, right? Any $10 you have is the same as any other $10, whether it's a $10 bill or a bunch of quarters or a check or a promise to get $10. And that allows us to do a lot of things and be flexible with it, right? Money is storable. You can save money and invest it. You couldn't do that in the barter days, right? If you raised chickens, you couldn't store them for 40 years. Money is general. You can use it for anything. It's divisible. You can break it up into different amounts. There's all these cool features of money as a measure of value and as a tool for trading that has allowed us to do so much stuff, specialize and focus and not just all be farmers and hunter-gatherers. What's great about money, all that complexity, is also one of the reasons why it's so hard to think about, because there's so many things you could do with money that it becomes overwhelming for most people to process the potential. There's a concept called opportunity costs, which again is sort of econ 101. We often forget the opportunity costs. When you make a financial decision, you're supposed to weigh the opportunity cost, which is what else could you do with that money you're about to spend now or anytime in the future. That's a lot to think about. Right? What else could you do with like $5, right? $5 you're about to spend on a coffee. It could be, a couple newspapers. It could be invested and have compound interest. It could be a bunch of bubble gum. There is just so many potential uses for that like we don't think about that. We don't even come close. And it's because it's so hard to think about. And I guess, I should pause for a second and say there's one thing I want everyone to take away from this. And almost every time I talk about money is that money is hard to think about, and it's hard for everyone. Like I talk to financial advisors, I talk to bankers and professionals, money people, and everyone has trouble with money, even the most experienced at the top of their game, because it is complex, because we deal with uncertainty and stress and a lot of unknowns. And ultimately, we deal with our emotions, right? There's no clear right or wrong choice with money that we all always know. There's always some uncertainty. And when uncertainty is in any decision, that gap gets filled by the emotional needs that we have. The need to feel like we're making the right choice. The need to feel like we've done the right thing. The need to feel good. And that's when we can be prone to make irrational decisions because we go by our feelings and emotions. And, I'll wrap up this current diatribe in a second, but for most of my life, and I think most of what I'd studied, I always thought of money as being very cold, heartless, and emotionless, as it's numbers on a spreadsheet, it's data, it's graphs, it's plotting out calculations. But emotion is the hidden variable in the equation of financial decisions that we just often forget about. And what I love about the field of behavioral science is that's what it's about. It's about the emotion that drives human decisions. It doesn't toss out all the traditional economics. It doesn't toss out all the data and data analysis. It just layers on top of that, like people's reality. And I think that's important, right? I mean, you've got data science and data science fans listening. And I think that like data science it's amazing what's happened in the last decade or so, that we know so much about people and the decisions that they make and where they go. I feel like marrying the data science with the people science is going to be like an incredible combination to not just know like where they're going and what buttons to push, but why, right? Why are people doing this? Then we can step back and get this holistic view of the data and the humanity, and hopefully get people to, a better place for themselves and their partners and teams and the world. Let's go save everybody.
No, that's awesome, man. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. And I really agree with you about taking the data science, colliding with the people science, and doing some interesting stuff. A couple of things I wanted to touch on here.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to money, right? Like why is it that we can't think, or sometimes we don't think about these decisions the way that we should be thinking about them? We ended up falling back on these mental shortcuts. Mm-hmm. Why is it that we do that? And what are a couple of mental shortcuts that we can kind of catch ourselves in so that we can correct?
Sure. Well, it goes back to this idea of wanting to feel good, right? These mental shortcuts that we fall for. And sometimes we fall for them, and sometimes marketers and salespeople like lay traps for us to walk into. We fall for them because we don't know what to do when it comes to a financial decision. We don't weigh that opportunity cost, right? No one, looks at a cup of coffee and thinks, oh, what else could I do with this $2.50, and goes through all the right. So instead of doing that, we're open to other things, other nudges is the term of art that's often used to get us to make a certain decision. And that's our real problem. And I should say that's not the end of the world. Like I don't advocate for people to become these computers that do weigh the opportunity cost. That's not realistic, right? You can't change human nature. But if we understand our human nature, we understand what we fall for, we understand the mistakes we make, then we can start to create systems and environments and products and services. So we use our human nature for our own benefit instead of having it be used against us. And for me, what I believe is first understanding these different biases, these principles or heuristics or traps. There's a lot of terms for it, which are the different sort of emotional triggers that make us make a decision one way or another. There are a ton out there. One of my favorites to talk about is something called the pain of paying, which is just this idea, this fact, I guess, that when we pay for something, it stimulates the same region of our brain as physical pain. And that pain should serve a purpose, right? It should make us stop and think about what we're doing, right? You put your hand on a stove, that burn, that sensation, that pain makes you look at your hand and move it away. So the pain of paying should make us stop and go, oh, am I making the right choice right now? But humans, we don't act that way. Instead of like feeling that pain, we numb the pain, right? All of these financial tools that we've developed, from credit cards to Apple Pay and all this, they all numb the pain of paying. So we don't feel the payment. We don't feel that pain, that burn. We don't think about it. And therefore we overspend, and we spend automatically. And, I love talking about the pain of paying because it's a great example of it. It's something that once you're aware of it, you'll notice the fact that you start spending, maybe like you're in a casino with casino chips, but also like you can dial it up or dial it down depending upon your goals, right? Like I introduced this as a negative, right? The idea that we reduce the pain of paying as a bad thing because I think that makes us spend more, right? And it does. Credit cards, Apple Pay, all these things make us all spend more. But you can know that and you can use it for your own benefit, right? You can do automatic deductions from your paycheck into a 401k for retirement or into a savings account, or use one of the many apps that helps you save for a goal automatically. And when something's automatic, you don't feel it, and therefore you're working towards a good goal. There's default options do that. There's the potential to use this for good. And a lot of interventions around the world have done just that. But coming from an American consumer perspective, I see that sort of reduction in friction being used to make people spend more. That's one. I feel like there's a ton more. I know we sort of pre-chatted in email some of your favorites, so I'll stop at that.
Yeah. Definitely going to get into some of these biases and stuff a little bit later. But this idea of opportunity cost is interesting too. You talked about it in the book. There's an experiment where you guys went to a car dealership and people were ready to buy a car, and you go up to them and ask, okay, what else could you spend this money on, right? Like, why is it that people get so surprised or maybe just stuck on this one thing that they could do with their money?
So that experiment that you mentioned was my co-author, Dan Ariely, and some of his colleagues, when they went to a car dealership, a Honda dealership, and they asked people, if you don't spend 30 grand on a Honda, what else could you spend it on, right? Essentially the opportunity costs of 30 grand on Honda. And no one would answer, and no one could answer. They pressed them. And finally, the best they could do is people would say, well, if I don't spend $30,000 on a Honda, I can spend it on a Toyota. That's not a different choice, right? That's just a different brand of car. It's still the same thing. And what that sort of shows is that it's not that when opportunity costs and that calculation comes up, we don't get it right. It's that we don't even really try. And I think among the reasons why those people couldn't get outside of buying a $30,000 car, and why we have the same thing, we can't think of alternatives, is none of us want to think of ourselves as being wrong. Right? I mean, we make a decision, and however much time we put into it, and it's often very little, sometimes it's a lot, we don't want to question ourselves. You can look no further than politics, a news item. I guess by the time this airs, who knows what's going on. We'll be living in caves with fire raining down on us. But people are stuck in their ways. I mean, there's something called confirmation bias. I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of it, where you get stuck with a certain opinion, and every new piece of news, even if it contradicts it, you find a way to make it support your worldview, right? You may say, oh, that's fake news. Or you say that's not accurately sourced. Or you say, well, it actually support, you find a way to do it. And the same is true for all of us in our lives and our spending decisions. And, I'm sure many of you have heard the experience like that. Older generations say, well, that's how it's always been, right? Like I always give, I have a financial advisor who I give, a $10,000 check to at the end of the year. That's just always how it's been. That mindset is hard to change in us. collectively or individually.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Like, yeah, 30,000 for a Honda. What else can you use it on? I could think of a few different things, but the book is full of so many interesting experiments. I really enjoyed going through those. And one part of the book I want to dig into now is the part about relativity, right? With the holiday season coming up, that's deals galore, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, so many ways for us to spend money, right? But I guess it turns out that we're not actually as good as we think we are when it comes to valuing stuff, are we? So talk to us about this concept of relativity and how it affects our decision-making when it comes to money.
Well, I would ask your listeners, this is something that I ask people when I give talks all the time. What's an easier question to answer? What would you like for dinner? Or would you like chicken or pasta for dinner? Most people say the easier question to answer is chicken or pasta. That's true. What would you like for dinner is sort of like, what's the opportunity cost? It could be anything, right? Like, I'm not eating tonight. It could be nothing. It could be like a bowl of pasta. It could be rocks. The whole world is open. That's a hard thing to think about. What would you like for dinner? Anyone out there that has kids, like I do, and congratulations, you don't ask that question because they can't answer that. But if you ask, would you like A or B? People know if they like A better than B or B better than A. They can compare the two. And so they might not know the absolute value of A or B, but they know the comparative value. And that's what relativity is about, when you compare the relative value of things. How that comes about, it comes out in a lot of ways in financial decision-making. One is, again, as we approach these holidays in sales, right? Sale prices are basically using relativity to make us feel like we're making the right choice. People will buy a sweater that was $100 but is marked down to $60 a lot more often than they'll just buy a $60 sweater. Because you approach that $60 sweater, you got to think, oh, is this a good deal? Like, what else could it be? Or some sort of opportunity cost? I have other sweaters. You look at a sweater that was $100 and it's marked down, you're like, oh, well, I know a $60 sweater is better than a $100 sweater. Like, I know that for sure. And suddenly you feel smart and you fall for that relativity. Relativity also comes up in percentages. I'm sure that your data science folks probably run this all the time, explaining to people like how the numbers play out. Again, another thing I'll ask folks is, if you go shopping and you're buying something for $25 and you go to the front, the clerk says it's next door for only $5, would you go next door? Most people say yes, I would. The next day you go to a different store, you're buying a $1,000 mattress and the clerk says, oh, it's available next door for $980. Would you go next door? Most people would say no. I really asked the same question twice, right? Would you go next door for $20? But people mentally get caught up in like the percent they're saving when they're saving nothing, or the percent, right? The first case, it's 80% off. The second, it's, I don't know, math, 2% off, whatever it is. And it just shows how like we're stuck in this comparing things, this sense of relativity that doesn't serve us. And when it comes to financial decisions, all the time, our choice, our thought should be, what is the amount of money that is leaving or entering my wallet or my account? But things like percentages can throw us off, right? Like investing professionals, they may present to someone, hey, if you do this now, you're going to save 0.1% more per year. And a lot of people are going to say that's nothing. But they know 0.1% compounded, et cetera, and how it plays out over time. That's huge. Right? That, depending on how much you're investing, that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. But people don't easily get that because of the relativity and the percentages. It's a fascinating thing. And one of the things I've loved about this field is also thinking, applying it to the rest of life, because I think it's not just in financial decisions that when we don't know how to value something, we compare it, right? This concept of FOMO, fear of missing out, is really about relativity, right? We, on social media, we look at people posting their beautiful lives, and compared to our lives that we know well, that seems like relatively great, and that can cause people to be depressed, and it causes problems. I mean, studies show like teenagers, it's harmful, and that's about like how we value things, in this case, our lives, by comparing the relative value to others. Oftentimes others like pretend and fake lives. So there's my deep moment for that.
Yeah, I think, is there like, do we know, like, in terms of brain size, like neurology or whatever, like why is it that we do this kind of comparison? Like, is there like something way back from ancient days of running on the savannah?
I'm confident there probably is. I'm not confident that I could give you the answer.
Yeah.
There is this concept of system one versus system two thinking, which some of your listeners may be familiar with. pioneered by
Kahneman.
Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They presented it in their book, which I'm spacing on the name right now. It's horrible. Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah.
The idea being like in our brains, we have a system one way of thinking and a system two way of thinking. System one is the sort of fast, like act now, you might think of a fight or flight, like rapid response. And it's sort of intuitive and it's often unconscious. Like we're not even always aware that we're making decisions based on system one. System two is the more thoughtful, deep, reflective thing that we like to think we all engage in. System two, slow, deep thinking, right? The book, Thinking Fast and Slow is the great way to present that. This on a brain, I don't remember how much neuroscience there is in there, but the idea of us, how we sometimes think slow and calm, but in the moment of stress and pressure, we often act on that system two, on the system one, rapid response, if you will, is sort of the underpinning a lot of this behavioral science, right? When it comes down to a decision moment, we often are making it based upon unseen forces and invisible sort of nudges that guide us. Even if we think we're doing some deep thinking, it tends to be momentary feelings and intuitions rather than, should I do it? I think next time you're buying something and you're whipping out your credit card, like, did you really weigh the pros and cons and what else you could spend that money on? Or you just kind of have an intuitive sense that you're doing the right thing? Now, it's not always bad. I don't want people to freak out, become freaks about money, but that's what happens to us.
So when it comes to shopping, one thing I do, I consider myself to be a pretty good shopper, but what I'll do is I'll set up in advance, in my mind, all right, cool, I'm going to go buy a sweatshirt, and most I want to spend on a sweatshirt, $40. That's the most I want to spend on one. And have that framework in place and then use that to guide whatever purchasing decisions I make. Is that a good way to kind of overcome that negative aspect of relativity?
Well, it's a good way to maintain some self-control in general and to shop in general, to set limits. I mean, one thing, overarching issue that we have above all else is sometimes we lack self-control. Even when we know, okay, there's relativity in sale prices that might trick us, or pain of paying, or anything else that we might fall for, we still might make the bad decision. So by setting up systems for shopping and spending, whether they're budgets or they're broad, like this week I'm going to only spend this much, or at this trip, or on this item, in your case a sweatshirt, that is a way to help us overcome. It's a way essentially to make us check ourselves. Because what might happen is, you say you're only going to spend $40 on a sweatshirt, you might see a $50 sweatshirt, and maybe in the end you buy it, but because you set up that limit, you're going to stop and think about it. You're going to stop and say, okay, is this worth $50? And you still might be prone to other mistakes, but it's even that small moment of stopping to think can make a big difference, right, over time. And maybe you won't buy it, because you're like, no, I set a $40 limit for a reason. I don't remember what it is right now. The sweatshirt's cool. I want it, but it'll still be there tomorrow if I change my mind. So yeah, setting up any sort of system. Sometimes it's shopping with a buddy. Sometimes it's going over your monthly spending and sort of criticizing yourself. There are a lot of different ways to start to overcome or at least recognize the patterns that you're falling into.
And when we're shopping, right, it's Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals coming up, and we'll see stuff on sale and maybe just buy it because it's reduced price, right? How are some ways that you've seen retailers and companies trick us with this relativity thing? Sure.
Well, just even having the sale price there is a way, right? We get anchored, is another term, to that high price. You think, oh, this sweater or it's got to be $100, but I'm getting a deal here. I'm saving $40. You're never saving any amount of money, right? That $40 doesn't exist just because you got a sweater marked down. You can't pay your rent with the money you saved shopping. You're still spending $60. But retailers know that we're going to feel good getting that savings. I mean, there's a lot of commercials that'll come out during the holidays that talk about how much savings you can get if you shop at Best Buy or Lowe's or whatever it may be. But there's no savings. You're just spending. You might spend a little less, but you're still spending. And the question you should be asking is, do I need this, and do I want to spend this amount for it? But we often don't. The holidays are treacherous for so many reasons. One is because of all the sales. And the other is the holidays themselves. They create this emotional pull. I mean, I don't want to get too quasi fake philosophical, but it's hard to, how do you express love to people? right? And the holidays and the commercialization of the holidays say you do it by buying gifts. And so all of a sudden, just a mere, like the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday shopping, it's a month where it's going right at your emotions and your emotional need to like be loved and express love and be part of what everyone else is doing, you know, go for social proof and follow the herd. And, you know, there's so many things, even before the price tag is put up, this sense that you have to buy this stuff. And look, there's a benefit to it. I'm not saying don't buy holiday gifts for your loved ones, but understand that like you're being swept up in this emotional tide that can carry you too far. And you know, if you're someone that tends to overspend, you need to know that. If you have it under control, then enjoy the spending. Go and listen to the jingles and see the Santa and look at the smiling, happy cherubic faces.
Yeah, this anchoring effect is really interesting to me. I was watching a show with I think it was Adam Grant. It was like these little shorts on Amazon Prime called "Why Are We So Stupid?" And they did this. Seen it, but yeah, it's great. They did this one on the anchoring effect where they had like this jar full of jelly beans, and they asked people, "Are there more or less than 6,000 jelly beans in this jar?" And then they asked another group of people, "Are there more or less than 1,000 jelly beans in this jar?" And it was like the same number of jelly beans each time. And then that anchoring effect just naturally pulls that estimate higher. It's also a good technique when it comes to negotiating salaries too, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is. They often say the person who puts out the first number has an advantage. And this is a classic example of me not practicing what I preach. I hate, as much as I'm here as an expert in money, I hate negotiating for fees or anything. But, you know, anchoring is just the idea. It's like an anchor. It's what it sounds like. The first number that's out there tends to have a really a stronger pull than any other numbers. You know, like it works with this idea of relativity, right? You see a car that's priced at $35,000 and you think it's worth $35,000. So whatever it might be marked down to, you're still sort of drawn to that $35,000 anchor as an idea of what it should be worth. That's why like a $32,000 car seems like it's $33,000 off because you started there. If you started at $25,000 and it was $32,000, you'd feel very differently. But the anchor is set that way. And in negotiations, right, you come in and you say, I want $100,000 salary, as opposed to them saying, I'm offering you a $60,000 salary. You might end up at 80 in the middle anyway, but that first person, it's a very different feeling, depending on how it's set up. And the draw is remarkably strong. You know, the jelly bean things are awesome. And there's related to anchoring what I think is really awesome is this idea called arbitrary coherence, which is actually Dan, my co-author, sort of pioneered the study showing that anchoring is arbitrary. You know, it's in many ways, you know, the study he did, I forget which one, there's been so many variations of it, but essentially that idea you presented, are there more or less than however many jelly beans? You can get in people's head a different way. You can say to them, put a bar of jelly beans and say, okay, what's your phone number? Okay, what are the last 3 digits of your phone number? Which is totally random, right? And okay, your last 3 digits of your phone number are 275. Do you think that there are more or less than 275 jelly beans in this jar? And then how many jelly beans in this jar do you think? And what they find is that people that have a low last 3 digits, right, 300 and less, tend to estimate that final question much lower than people that have a high, like 700, 800 at the end, because of this anchoring, because of like this arbitrary coherence and the fact that it's totally random. It's not like you're walking in there and someone's saying, I'm a jelly bean expert and I think there's 800 jelly beans here. What do you think? It's like, what's your phone number? What's your social security? It's the suggestive power of numbers and our need to feel like we're on the right track is just so strong. It's I wish I was genuinely evil. Like I wrote the satire "Get Rich Cheating," but like as I can never actually be a bad person, which someday, because marketers, man.
It's super interesting, like because I've been going down this rabbit hole of studying behavioral science, behavioral economics for the last maybe a month or two. I tend to study things and like go down rabbit holes for like a month or two at a time, and this is where I've been recently, and it's been super fascinating, just super
Yeah.
interesting. And like, I'm looking for ways to like do this to my kid as he's growing up. Like, how can I manipulate his behavior using some of these techniques?
Well, I mean, look, that's
in a good way.
Right. No, you joke, but in some ways, isn't that what setting an example for your child is? Right.
Yeah.
You're like, we don't lie. Now, we do lie. Like some of us lie about Santa Claus, talking about holidays. Some of us lie about like why mommy and daddy are yelling at each other. Like there are little lies, but you say we don't lie as a standard. And then that's the anchor from which things might stretch a little bit. Setting an example for how hard you work and are you healthy and exercise. In many ways, it's anchor. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, again, I go back to what I said earlier. You can't change human nature. Like my goal is not to make people change who they are. So recognize that these things play a role in our day-to-day lives and decision-making, whether it's financial or otherwise.
Talking about financial decision-making, earlier you touched on this idea of the fungibility of money, right? That, a dollar should be a dollar, right? But we don't always think of like that, do we, right? And we were talking a little bit earlier about the opportunity cost of, not getting a Honda. I'm wondering, what's the opportunity cost? How's that play with like the mental accounting? I guess first of all, let's talk about what mental accounting is. Sure. And then could it be that these people who opted to get if they're asked where you can do the $30,000, was that because they had called that their Honda Civic dollars or whatever?
Sure. Right? So mental accounting is a fascinating bias or behavioral principle. And briefly what it is that when we think about money and other things, but in this case money, we are thinking about it very differently depending on the source of that money or the use of that money. For instance, people will, if you give someone a $12,000 bonus at the end of the year, as opposed to a $1,000 a month raise, it's treated very different. Like the $1,000 a month raise feels like this is serious money. The source is my work. It's my job. That $1,000 is spent in a more responsible way. A $12,000 bonus feels like it's a bonus. It's a surprise. It's fun, right? It's a one-time payment, and people spend that much less responsibly. Responsible is a loose word, but just they don't spend it on like bills and everything. They spend it on something fun and frivolous, or they carve off $5,000 to spend it. You're still getting $12,000 for the year, but because of the source of it and the framing of it, you think it differently. Or another way of looking at it is like, money from your job is treated very different than maybe like inheritance or a lottery winning. Now, our $12,000, whether we get it from a bonus or a salary, or we get it from a lottery winning or going to casino or whatever it may be, that $12,000 is our $12,000. It's fungible, right? It should be the same money no matter where we get. No matter where we get it from, right? You find a $100 bill on the floor or on the ground, in the street. That's the same as $100 you got elsewhere. That goes all into your account, if you will. But we treat it very differently, and that also goes for how the destination of the money, if you will. Like we treat fun things and discretionary spending and pleasures very differently than we treat important stuff like insurance and rent and healthcare. This is the mistake we make, and I use the term mistake, meaning compared to what a rational economic actor does, or a perfect economic human. They shouldn't do that because of fungibility, right? They should recognize that all our money is the same. However, mental accounting is one of these things where like it does serve a purpose, right? It would be too much for us to think of all of our money as all the same. Mental accounting essentially leads us to be able to budget and to move forward, right? Again, if you were to like go to dinner and think, hey, should I spend $100 on dinner? This is the same $100 I have to pay my health insurance with and plan for my retirement or whatever. That's too much. So if we can create accounts, mental or otherwise, where this is my discretionary spending, this is my shopping money, this is my saving for the future money, that can be a healthy thing to do to help us make our decisions less cumbersome and less overwhelming. So to answer your question about the Honda thing, I mean, it is entirely conceivable that these folks have made they have a car buying mental account, right? I need a car for whatever reason. And so I put $30,000 in my car buying account, and it just gets hard to literally move money from account to account. Again, you've done a moment of thinking and you decided this is the best thing to do. It's hard to then tell yourself, wait, Jeff, I made a mistake, and go back and change that. So it's another reason why it's hard to get people off that. Is because they've said, this is what I'm going to spend. So, mental accounting is both irrational, but potentially helpful, as long as it's sort of not taken to extremes and done in a stubborn way.
What would be like an extreme example of mental accounting? Would that be, I think there's the example in your book where you just take actual physical dollar bills and just split it up amongst the envelopes. Would that be like the most extreme case?
I think, I think budgeting to the penny and to an obsessive level, it's just not healthy. Now, look, everyone has different moments in their lives where they need to do that, right? You lost a job, you're having a tough time, you need to like pinch every penny. But there are also folks that are relatively well off that say, I'm going to put $100 here and I'm not going to spend a single penny more. And then if they have an emergency or they have someone's birthday and they want to buy a gift, they beat themselves up for over spending $10 extra. And that's just not a healthy way to live, right? We don't, again, want everyone to be these machines. We just want them to have some more control. There are folks that take that to the extreme of, sometimes literally putting their money in envelopes, and other times just sort of limiting their own options. Money is supposed to help us, blossom. It's supposed to provide a little bit of freedom to us to have choices, as I said, to decide what we want to do and focus. When we spend it, irresponsibly, we can get in trouble, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's meant to be a tool of advancement for us.
Starting to feel like I can't trust myself.
No, you can't. Give me your money. I'll take care of it. It's fine. Just Venmo right away. It'll be great.
That's an interesting thing. Like give you my money, you'll take care of it. Do we have the same cognitive biases for other people's money as we do for our own?
Yes, but it's less extreme. Functionally, no. We treat it's very different. Like we're all prone to the same biases. It's just a question of in what context and how strong those are. And what I found is, when you think about what I would tell you to do, if I was your financial advisor, what I would tell you to do with your money pay your school bills and retirement and save for your kid's future, like that tends to be me going back in the cold, looking at this, like the graphs and the numbers and not being emotional. But when I start thinking about my money, right, that's my college, that's my retirement and my kids. And like, I'm emotional about that. Those things are connected to me in a way that no one else can understand. So the biases do impact me differently. It's why having a financial advisor is for the most part like a great idea, right? Someone who can take money which is so emotionally charged, and it's not you and your partner or spouse who have their own. There's a whole other layer of emotions there. It's someone separated who can look at it with those numbers and help you think about what to do. Now, of course, there's also the issue of like financial advisors, like you have to get a reputable one and trustworthy, et cetera. But if you're in a position to get advice from someone who doesn't have that emotional connection and can just look and hear what you want to do and think about what would be best for you based upon those numbers and charts, that is a help. You don't have to do what he or she says, but it would be great to do. I'm not that person. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a like, you put your money in these stocks or anything. I'm a like, this is why you're so crazy, man. Come on.
Thanks very much for that, man. So
you can still send me your money. I don't mind.
You can send it to me, you guys, if you want. So you talked about like the last section of the book, Dollars and Cents, is all about how we could kind of ward off these negative, I don't know, are they negative cognitive biases? I don't know. They might serve some good purposes. Yeah. But we talked about anchoring. We talked about arbitrary coherence and confirmation bias. Another one you talk about is this concept of herding and self-herding. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. Herding, people may have heard of like a social proof or social pressure, just the idea that we tend to go along with the crowd. A lot of people hear this referred to when it comes to like investing in stocks, right? Like everybody's buying Apple, I got to do it. Or the stock market is falling because everyone's selling, I should sell it too. Or, it happens, when you see people sort of, I don't know, there's a new shoe that's really hot and everyone's wearing the new shoe. You got to go buy the new shoe or a new car or whatever it is. When we go along with what others are doing, because we haven't figured out if it's the right choice or not, And it's particularly powerful with our peer group, a more focused peer group. Like if I go on TV and I see, everybody's hoarding toilet paper, maybe I'm a little drawn to that by like the idea of hurting, but like it's everybody. If I go on TV and I see, everybody in my neighborhood that's just like me and has a young family and lives on my street is doing it, then I'm like, oh, I got to do it. In both cases, I haven't really decided if it's the right choice. I'm just being guided by the herd. Now, if you take that idea of like it being a tight peer group even farther, really to its ultimate endpoint, I am a peer group for myself. I am the only peer in the world for me. And so if I, in a world, could see that I was doing something and all of the Jeff Kreislers were doing something, I would, of course, think that that's the right thing to do. And how this tends to play out is when we look at our past decisions. And again, we don't want to question ourselves. We want to say we're wrong. And we say, oh, that past decision that Jeff made, I know Jeff. Jeff is smart. Jeff's just like me. He probably made the right choice. And we tend to just go along with the decision that we've made in the past. The easy example is going to buy a $5 latte, right? I guess avocado toast has replaced $5 lattes as the evil overspend, but okay, fine. Say you go buy a $10 avocado toast. If I go on Monday to buy that $10 avocado toast, and it's my first time, I'm like, yeah, let's give it a try. I'll have it. It'll be good. If I go back on Wednesday, I'm probably not going to really think about it. I might think, oh, I remember on Monday I said it was a good idea, so I'll do it again. By Friday, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely getting the avocado toast. I always get the avocado toast, right? It's how it's always been, right? And so on and so on. And it builds, and we tend to like follow our own herd, which can, lead us down sort of this confirmation bias and reinforcing path of a poor decision. So it's an easy phrase, but you better check yourself now and then before you, I don't even want to finish the phrase, wreck yourself. I'm getting a little punchy. It's the end of a long day. I've got to rhyme. And
Hey, I dig it. This concept of self-hurting is interesting because memory came to mind when I was very early in my career. I was studying to be an actuary, and every morning I'd have to study for actuarial exams. And I'd sit at this cafe, and I'd get a apple fritter on Monday. Mm-hmm. And I say, it was a good idea on Monday. Let's get it again on Tuesday. And next thing you know, it's like 3 months, and I've been eating apple fritters for breakfast for 3 months straight.
Right, which isn't just bad financially, but it's not great for the waistline.
No, definitely was.
Everything in moderation, right? There's another grandma's phrase for you.
So, I mean, officially, it's official. We suck at making decisions. So, What are your top 3 favorite tips, for taking our flawed financial thinking and maybe helping ourselves with it?
Well, I'd say broadly speaking, to just stop and think about the big picture. Like when you can, like, why are you making this choice? Not like we tend to get caught up in the mechanics of like how we're paying or making decisions, but like why? Like how does this choice connect to who you are as a person and what you want to be about? And that sounds very flighty, but there are studies showing in the moments of stress and uncertainty and pressure, if we stop and think about the big picture and our goals and our values, that can just help settle us into a moment where we think, oh, is this really about who I am? And what that tends to do is it helps us think about the future a little bit more, because our biggest, this issue of self-control is oftentimes we don't think about the future. We just act, upon the emotional feelings of right now. So if you find a way to stop and think about the choice, that's a big picture, great thing to do every time. Now, my next item sort of refines that every time thing. Like, don't stress about the little spends. We tend to worry about the little spends, right? Like a cup of coffee and whether I should tip 50 cents or not, and get overwhelmed and not worry so much about the big spends, right? Like a car, a college, a house. I mean, we think about those, but like within those spendings, like a car, there may be like a $1,000 add-on that we're like, oh, fine, whatever. I'm already spending $30,000. Or a house, right? There might be like a renovation that's an extra $10,000, and you're like, oh, whatever. I'm already spending $300,000. That's more money than you're ever going to make up for tipping a barista. But we tend to like stress about the little things and not the big ones. And my advice would be this whole idea of like stop and thinking about it. Like if you have to choose, always stop and spend as much time as you can on big number, the actual amount of money that's being spent, right? Not the percent, but the actual amount. Like stop and think about those, because that impacts your future and your potential and your freedom. Don't stress about the little ones. I'm not saying just spend thousands of $1 bills, throwing them out the street at people, but like, don't worry about that. Like live your life. The ones that are in the middle, the sort of like recurrent, medium-sized spending, those you should think about now and then, right? Like paying for cable, paying $150 a month for cable. Think about that when you first sign up, but then don't worry about it every night, but for 6 months or whatever, but every now and then check in and say, am I watching cable? Is it worth $150? Any sort of like recurring automatic bill payment you have, like it's nice to not worry about your payments, your cell phone, etc. So let it go. Don't worry about it all the time, but every now and then check in on it. So it sort of flips what we tend to do on its head. Again, we tend to stress about the little ones and not the big ones. Let's just flip that on our head. The third thing, the piece of advice I have, there's a ton of them, but I would say like finding a trusted person to talk about with your money, even if it's not a financial advisor, but just someone who you can talk about your money that is not like emotionally connected to you. Like it's not your partner. It's just someone who can give you another perspective, whether that's like, hey, do you think I should spend money on this? Should I buy this car or this house? Or, you're going shopping, right? You go shopping with friends sometimes. Like, no, it's hard because we tend not to share all our financial details with everyone. We like to act like we know what we're doing, but like find a trusted friend or someone who you can be yourself with. Like, again, nobody knows what they're doing with money. We all pretend we do, and find someone who you can be honest about that. This is a lot easier said than done. It's a big challenge. As I say it, and as people are listening, like who is active? Like, I can't think of anybody. I have friends, but I don't talk about money. Try to find some place where you can talk about money. Maybe it's not a person. Maybe it's a forum. Maybe it's, I don't know, a book. Maybe it's something. But find a place where you can be honest with yourself about how hard it is to think about money.
Thank you very much for those tips, man. I really appreciate that. Do you want to leave us with any other cognitive biases that we might find ourselves falling victim to this season when it comes to anything related to money?
That's a big one. I would say that the broadly speaking, the bias that I'm most interested in exploring comes from an idea where like money is not as powerful as we think it is. More studies are showing that like as a matter of like incentives and motivation and engagement in the workplace, money is, you have to get a certain level of money, but like after that, like that doesn't really engage us. It doesn't engage our sense of purpose and our identity and professional like motivation. I think that's true throughout our lives. Like money is a substitute we often fall back on, again, for how do you measure love and these other things. But like just remember that it's not the be all and end all. It's our most common way of measuring value. I know from my own life, right? I talked about the education and the opportunities that I passed up to be a corporate lawyer and everything. And my family didn't understand. And every little accomplishment I had, like I got on a comedy show or I was on TV or I went over and worked with somebody. The question was, how much does it pay? That isn't how it was measured in value to me, but I came to understand that's just like how they could measure something that they didn't understand the value of. And that's okay, right? But recognize that money isn't the only way to measure things, whether it's your own value, your relationship value, or even your work and your purpose in life. And when we do that, we'll start to find the other things that matter to us, and we'll start to be able to make our financial decisions without as much pressure, without feeling like every financial decision impacts our value as people. They're just decisions that help us move along through the days.
The last formal question before we jump into a quick random round.
Oh, no.
It's 100 years in the future.
Oh,
what
God.
do you want to be remembered for?
Saving the planet from an asteroid. If I can't, I would like to make critical thinking cool. I would just like, in whatever realm, finances, politics, personal lives, like I would like to make the idea that we think about stuff to be the default. And I feel like our culture has really walked away from critical thought for thinking through more than one step, right? Thinking about the future ramifications, just really deeply thinking about stuff. I feel like we've walked away from that as a leading value. And I would love to return to that. Not that we're all going to sit around in top hats and pontificate about stuff. We can find a way to fold it into our hectic lives. But let's find that way.
I dig it, man. So first question here in the random round.
Oh, God.
What are you currently most excited about or currently exploring?
I'm most excited about the idea of rapid COVID tests or COVID vaccine. As I mentioned, I have two young kids, and I'm really just getting into being with them, and they're in different stages of their education. And I've come to try to embrace the fact that I am a homeschool teacher a lot of times, and I'm sort of learning the art and the craft of teaching and helping them learn. I've always been involved, but more so now, and I'm loving that.
What are you inspired by right now?
I'm currently on I guess, a science kick in a weird way. Like, I'm just sort of tooling around and looking at new studies and things that are out there. It might be a reaction to people rejecting science so aggressively out in the COVID world, or might be my dad's voice echoing in my head as a scientist, but just, I don't know, geeking out a little bit on that stuff.
What do you believe that other people think is crazy?
There's a lot. I believe that my spirituality is a physics-based spirituality. I believe in the power of the universe. I don't believe it's an omnipotent being, but I believe that there is a beauty and an art to all of the forces in the universe, and how they can play a role in us. And I think that there is so much power in what we haven't yet learned about ourselves and the universe that connects us, that I'm excited for every little marginal breakthrough to see what else we can do as people in this crazy spinning.
That's pretty interesting. I've got like kind of a physics-based spirituality twist on reincarnation that is grounded in the laws of physics, because, energy can't be created or destroyed, only transferred. So if you think about the electrical impulses that energize your body right now, but
I love it. No,
yeah, that's
it.
Yeah,
it's as valid as going up to clouds and playing on a harp.
Yeah, I mean, I was in high school when I made that up. I was definitely on some clouds at 4:20 p.m.
Understood.
Yeah. Well, what would you do if you're the last person on Earth?
I don't know, man. I always think about that Twilight Zone episode where the guy, he really wanted to read and couldn't get time to read, and there was an apocalypse, and suddenly had all time in the world to read, and then he broke his reading glasses. And he was like, F, man, I can't. So I don't want to put anything out there, but I don't know. I think I would I would walk. I like motion. I'd walk, and I probably wouldn't worry so much about writing down all the crazy ideas that I have, because I just let them go. Question. I'll come back to you.
Yeah. Speaking of reading, what are you currently reading?
I'm currently reading two books. One is one of the Harry Potter books I'm reading with my son. And another is a book called Wanting that a friend of mine gave me, that I only just started. I don't read nearly enough books. I tend to read short form things, magazines and internet crap, but I'm trying to do some more reading.
What do you have on repeat in terms of a song?
Oh, as any good middle-aged white boy, I'm listening to Billie Eilish, Bad Boy, a lot lately. In fact, I listened to it right before this podcast.
All right. That's awesome, man. I'll open up the random question generator.
Oh, God, I'm scared.
That's okay. They're all safe. What's your favorite book?
Welcome to the Monkey House by Kurt Vonnegut. It's a collection of his short stories. I'm sure your listeners, there are a lot of Vonnegut fans in here.
Yeah, I love Vonnegut. He's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
Oh, man, I've done a lot of thinking. Like, I've gone around in a lot of circles in this. And so I would say stopping time has been a consistent one, as well as sort of telekinesis. I don't want to control other people, but being able to, sort of use the force essentially on objects.
What incredibly strong opinion do you have that is completely unimportant in the grand scheme of things? You
should load the dishwasher in a way that is conscious of how you're going to have to unload it later.
That's a good one. We'll do the last one here. What's the best thing you got from one of your parents?
I just think like a value in education and learning. Yeah.
So what's next on the agenda for you? Working on any new books or anything?
I am always doing different projects, speaking. Right now, peoplescience.com has been a baby of mine that'll be about, by the time it comes out, will be close to 3 years. Looking at some other opportunities, just looking at ways, again, to spread the gospel of behavioral science as a tool. People can track that down, peoplescience.com, or track me down at jeffkreisler.com, and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all that, and see what's happening. I'd love to hear from your listeners what they think.
Jeff, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be here. I really appreciate you at the end of a very long day for you to come hang out, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.